It's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And you know that moment where you know your child can hear you, but they're not listening? That's what we're going to talk about today. And that seems like a little thing where kids are being obstinate or stubborn, or they are just like not paying attention to you on purpose. And sometimes that's the case. I would argue that that's very infrequently the case, because generally our kids want to please us and be connected to us, even if it doesn't seem like their behavior is telling us that. But I wanted to go into this notion of hearing versus listening, because it turns out, like most things, if you've been following me for a while, you know, it's complicated. And so here's what happens, right? When we hear, that's like a mechanical process. The sound goes in, it gets translated into an electrical current that travels up the auditory nerve to the brain. Okay, but here's what happens next. In your brain, you then perceive the sound, right? But then you have to interpret the sound as well. So you have to know if all the sounds you're hearing, number one, are relevant. So right now, for example, it's cicada season. There are hundreds of millions of cicadas outside. They're making a lot of noise. I can hear them, but I'm not paying attention to them. I'm not listening to them, right? Because it's not relevant to what I'm doing. Actually, now I am, but that's a side issue. Okay, so you have to be able to know, out of all the things that I can hear, what's the thing I need to pay attention to? What's the thing I need to be listening to? This is something that kids, particularly those with developmental delays and quirks and issues, are dealing with. But most kids at one time or another have struggled with this. Like, what's important? What do I need to be paying attention to? Okay, let's assume that your child has now figured out that they need to be paying attention to your voice. And most kids do. Again, our brains are sort of wired in most cases to pay attention to human voice, because that's the most important, that's the most relevant, that's where we get safety information and love and all of those things. Okay, but some brains are not wired like this, so we have to keep that in mind. All right, let's assume we're paying attention to the human voice. Now, we have to make a match between what we hear and what we know. And that seems like such an automatic process, but in some brains, that signal gets scrambled and they don't make sense of what they hear. And it doesn't match onto anything that is already in storage. And so it's a little bit like if you're learning a foreign language and a speaker uses a word that you don't know, that signal has nowhere to go. You hear them fine, but you don't know what it means. You don't have any reference for that. And sometimes in our kids, particularly with language delays, that's what's happening. They don't have an anchor for that message. And so they just discard it as being irrelevant. Or they, sort of fight back, or whatever it is that they're doing, whatever their strategy is. Usually I would say it's probably just to let it go, right? Okay, let's assume we've paid attention to the speaker. We can hear mom saying whatever she's saying. And now I have a reference, like I know what it means. Okay, then you've got to translate what you know something means into an observable action. So, for example, if mom says, go get your shoes, and I understood what that meant, then I have to get my body to be in motion, to go to the shoes and get them. And again, all these steps seem like, well, yeah, duh, right? But sometimes brains have a hard time putting bodies into action. Sometimes the signal gets scrambled and it doesn't end up. And so you kind of, you've got the kid who looks over at the shoes and is like, yeah, those are my shoes. But I can't quite propel myself through space in order to get them. And so this is like I'm simplifying a really complex thing here, but just because they're not doing what you ask doesn't necessarily mean they're stubborn. And there might be a problem with interpreting or understanding or following through, formulating an action plan on what's being said. And so if you're observing that your child is constantly, disregarding you or constantly not doing what's asked, it's worth asking why. Is it a listening issue, even though they might be able to hear you just fine? Until next time, take care.